This is the first time I've had to do that in a while.
Hummus is in the building, so everybody is here.
Especially when I was talking to kids at the school, so I had to take them
Good 5:30 on the dot? What's up? Shake them quick. This meeting of the Starkville Board of Aldermen will now come to order. Please rise for the saying of the Pledge of Allegiance, to be followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, you have before you a copy of the modified written agenda. I have two housekeeping corrections for you, things that were misprinted on the original copy. Under board business, item E should read consideration of calling for a public hearing on an ordinance to amend all existing ordinances containing quasi-judicial entities. It was originally placed on your agenda as adopting the ordinance. It would need to go through a public hearing process first. And the second matter, these may have already been corrected on the written copy that you have. Is it on the written copy?
It was corrected, that one.
Okay, the second matter is consideration of a request from Man Conrad and Lynn Birch. It originally read a presentation by. So if those two things are corrected on your written copy, then there will be no change needed. Do we have any revisions to the agenda? Alderman Corey.
Yeah, under public services, item J, number 1, I need to remove that from consent as I will be recusing myself on that item. J, number 1.
All right, item 11J1 was previously on the consent agenda. It has been removed from the consent agenda. Alderman Corey, do you have further proposed revisions?
That's it.
Any further proposed revisions from the members of the board?
Yes, I've got a few. I think Alderman Parker has a few too.
Alderman Dumas, would you like to proceed, or Alderman Parker, would you like to
Let Alderman
proceed?
Parker go ahead. I've got a few notes to make here first. I know you've got some to make.
Okay. Mayor, I propose item 10G to be moved to the consent agenda as presented, conditioned upon the applicant proceeding through the design review committee process.
All right, proposed revision from Alderman Parker is to place item 10G on the consent agenda. That is the approval of the development of a landscape median on South Lafayette Street and acceptance of right-of-way deeded to the city from First Baptist Church with the memorandum of understanding for development, maintenance, and acceptance of other related matters conditioned upon proceeding through the development review committee process, otherwise as presented. Alderman Parker, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on consent. Alderman Parker, do you have further proposed revisions?
Under planning, item 11.3A, move that to consent as recommended by P&Z with the following modifications by the Board of Aldermen. A, change the 35-foot planted median in condition 1 to a 30-foot planted median. And item B, delete condition 3, which required public parking.
All right, Alderman Parker, are you going to have consent items related to several of these items that are under planning?
I think I have about 10.
All right, if it pleases you, it would be fine if you proceeded through all of those at once.
I can. Item 11.3B, noting that the board will take no action on the appeal as the appellant, Dan Camp, has withdrawn the appeal, and any comments related to the appeal will be heard at the direction of the city attorney at the outset of the meeting. Item 11.3C, noting that the board takes on the first matter as the request for variance has been withdrawn by the applicant, and any comments related to the request for variance will be heard at the direction of the city attorney. The conditional use to allow a place of worship to be used as a child care facility is approved as presented. Item 11.3E, as recommended by P&Z and as presented. Item
You
11.
skipped D.
Say again?
You skipped D.
You had D earlier.
I skipped D.
Oh, you did that one earlier.
11.3D.
Yeah, you did that one earlier.
No, you got it. That was the
The
request.
second was the earlier one he did.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, you got it.
Sorry, now I'm confused. All right, so now we're on 11.3E. Is that right?
That's it.
As recommended, move it to consent as recommended by P&Z and as presented. 11.3F, as recommended by P&Z and as presented. 11.3G, as recommended by P&Z and as presented with the following modifications. Change the 35-foot planted median in condition 10 to a 30-foot planted median, and delete condition 13, which required public parking. Item 11.3H, as approved and presented, noting that any comments in the public hearing will be heard by the city attorney at the outset of the meeting. Item 11.3I, as approved as presented, noting that any comments in the public hearing will be heard by the city attorney at the outset of the meeting. And 11.3J, as presented. I'll move all those items to consent. So A through J.
And Alderman Parker, I see that you
I have-
have a writing. Is that
I do
writing
have
in
it
full
reduced to
form?
writing if you want me to.
And Alderman Parker, is this as you just read it?
It is?
Then without objection, as Alderman Parker has reduced his proposed revision to writing and has read it, I will not reread it. Any objection to not rereading?
No objection, just explain to whether a roundabout, that's all I wanted to do, just explain to what some of this is going on. I know the roundabout was moved out, but just explain some of it so that it can be heard.
And it may be better if we ask if it please, I mean, we can ask them how to explain the roundabout. It's more of a landscape median. As you come down, there will be a landscape median in the middle. Is that what you're referring to?
Right.
The landscape median will be in the middle. The church will plan it and maintain it, and the road will allow the fire truck to get around and everything of that nature.
It still will be two-way traffic, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yes, sir.
That's what
Two-way
I'm trying to say.
traffic, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And I have placed the writing with the clerk, so without objection, it will not be reread, and it is as stated and written by Alderman Parker. Is there any objection to prior to calling for objections for the revision to the agenda, which will place all these matters on consent? The city attorney has some housekeeping from a public hearing standpoint, because there are several public hearings that would be affected by placing these matters on consent. So I'm going to let him walk us through the public hearing process.
Okay, and this is just a housekeeping matter to make sure we're touching our due process bases with these items going on consent or being voted potentially to go on consent, given that they were noticed as public hearings. So I just need to ask some questions related to 5 of the items that were noted for public hearings. The first was item 11B3B, which was an appeal by former Mayor Dan Kemp of the Board of Adjustment and Appeals regarding a setback variance request related to the First Baptist Church project. Did anybody come tonight to be heard on that issue? Would anyone like to be heard on that issue? Would anyone like to be heard on that issue? The next public hearing was an appeal by the applicant from the conditions imposed by the Planning and Zoning Commission for adherence to the setback requirements in a T5 district and a request for consideration of EX 1301. Ms. Brule, can you please come forward, please, ma'am? Can you tell the audience generally what EX 1301 was?
Yes, EX 1301 is a use by exception under the T5 district regulations. that basically was asking for the use of a child care facility in a transect district. The P and Z heard that item and attached some conditions to it. One of those conditions was that the setback would be within the setback requirements of the T5 district. And the other one was that the building be, or the building fall within all the transect district requirements.
And I understand from the proposed motion by Mr. Parker tonight that the applicant has worked out these issues with the city and no longer wants to appeal that issue. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so do you want to be heard on that issue?
No.
Would anyone else want to be heard on item EX 1301? Anyone for item EX 1301? Anyone for item EX 1301? The next public hearing that was noticed is 11B3G, which was a public hearing triggered by an appeal by the applicant, First Baptist Church, from the conditions attached to the approval of the conditional use and a request for consideration of CU 1303. Ms. Brule, can you describe what CU 1303 was?
Conditional use for surface parking to be located in a B1 district.
And I understand from Mr. Parker's motion that the applicant has reached a deal on that appeal and no longer wants to pursue that appeal?
That's correct.
Do you want to be heard on that issue?
No, sir.
Does anyone else want to be heard on item CU 13-03? Anyone? Anyone? Okay, we have two more. The next public hearing matter was another appeal by the applicant, First Baptist Church, for conditions attached to item CU 13-04. Ms. Brule, what was CU 13-04?
And 1304 was the use of surface parking in a B1 district. And I misspoke. G was surface parking in a C2 district.
Okay.
Conditional use, and I apologize. It was 03. 04 is surface parking in a B1 district.
Okay. And I understand from Mr. Parker's motion that the applicant no longer wants to appeal those matters because a resolution has been reached. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you want to be heard on that issue? Does anyone else want to be heard on item CU 1304 or CU 1303, as Ms. Brule just amended the description of those two items? CU 1303 or CU 1304? Anyone? Anyone? Our last item is item number I, which was a public hearing triggered by the appeal of First Baptist Church to conditions attached to item CU 13-05. Ms. Brule, what was item CU 13-05?
That too was a use of surface parking in a B1 district as a conditional use.
Okay. And I understand from Mr. Parker's motion that the applicant no longer wants to appeal that issue because a resolution has been reached between the parties?
Correct.
Do you want to be heard on that issue?
No, sir.
Does anyone else want to be heard on item CU 13-05? Anyone? Anyone? Okay. Due process has been met.
All right, the due process requirements have
Thank you,
been
Mr.
met. You have now pending before you the proposed revision to the agenda to place those matters as reduced to writing by Alderman Parker on the consent agenda. Is there any objection, Alderman Sistrum?
I don't have any objection. For those that aren't familiar with the process, would you explain what being placed on the consent agenda means?
That means that right now the board is moving all of those things to the consent agenda. In a moment, the board is going to take up the approval of the consent agenda as a whole. If no one objects to the approval of the consent agenda as a whole, then the board has unanimously adopted all of those items. So at the point the consent agenda is adopted, all of those items are officially adopted. Is there any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, those matters have been placed on the consent agenda.
I've got a few, Mr. Mayor.
All right?
Under board business, and I guess this is questions for our city attorney. Items A and B are both associated with a public hearing, so we need to leave those on as matters to still be considered, I would imagine. One
Yes.
being the street naming and the other.
Yes.
I'd like to place under board business item C on consent.
Proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to replace the approval of a request by Mac Braden, Chelsea Pierce, and Selena Tew of the Mississippi American Institute of Architecture students requesting to close public street and for participation from the City of Starkville with in-kind services as presented on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, do you have further?
Under board business, item E, placed to consent as clarified by your motion earlier.
Proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place item 10E, the approval of calling for a public hearing on an ordinance to amend all existing ordinances containing quasi-judicial entities as presented on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection?
I'm gonna object to that one.
All right, that matter will remain on the regular agenda. Alderman Dumas, do you have further proposed?
I do. Under board business, item F to consent.
Proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place item F under board business on the consent agenda. That is the approval of a request from Man Conrad and Lynn Birch on behalf of First United Methodist Church requesting participation from the City of Starkville for street closings and in-kind services for the Stop Hunger Now 5K run scheduled for Sunday, April 7th, 2013 from 3:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. as presented on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda.
Under board business, item H to consent.
Proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place the approval of budget modification number 1 for the City of Starkville Cotton Mill Marketplace Development Katrina Supplemental Community Development Block Grant number R-103-347-01-KED for purposes stated in that report as presented on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, do you have further proposed
I
revision?
do. Item I, under board business to consent.
Proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place the authorization of the mayor to create and execute all documents necessary for the parking garage and appointment of Taylor Adams and Phyllis Benson to negotiate with the architect for contract services as recommended by the Proposal Selection Committee as presented on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any object?
I've got a question though. I may be wrong, but in a previous meeting, didn't we authorize you to do all the cotton mill documentation anyway?
Well, no, this is related specifically to the proposal negotiation process. Well, if the board approved this, it would have been through its first stage, where those proposals that have been received have been scored. That creates a priority for negotiation. Now, what this item does is it designates Taylor Adams on behalf of the city and Phyllis Benson as grant administrator to go and negotiate, beginning with the highest ranking firms for an agreement to facilitate the project, and it authorizes me to execute the documents once we have a deal. In the event that they cannot reach terms with the entities that scored the highest, they are then authorized to negotiate with the entity that scored the next highest, and if they reach terms with that entity, I'm then authorized to execute the documents. Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda.
All right, under finance and administration, item 3 to consent with the suggested motion being clarified as the motion in the packet. Yeah, refinancing, clearly it's no bonds.
Is refinancing in the call?
It is. Move approval for refinancing of electric department revenue bonds with Morgan Keegan as underwriter and approval to execute all necessary documents.
All right, can you pass that to me? The proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place the approval of refinancing of electric department revenue bonds with Morgan Keegan as the underwriter and approval to execute all necessary documents otherwise as presented on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection?
Just a quick comment that it is simply a refinancing. It results in a cost savings to the city and.
That's correct. No new maturity date. These bonds will mature on their current schedule, and our net savings are about $175,000 as currently presented.
Thank you.
Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, do you have further proposed
I do,
provisions?
under personnel, the new item number 1, temporary hire of the sanitation driver on consent.
Proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place item 11H1, the authorization to hire a temporary driver in the Sanitation and Environmental Services Department in the absence of a driver on FMLA leave as presented on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, do you have further
Under
proposed
public
provisions?
services, item number 2 on consent.
All right, proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place item 11J2, the approval to advertise for the purchase of a replacement combination sewer jet and vacuum truck for the new construction and rehab division as presented on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, that's your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear objection? Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda.
And then to be clear, did we get item B under community development?
Not on consent.
I'd like to place that on consent as well.
Item B, now I have,
It's a new
B1B.
addition.
B1B.
It's a call for public hearing.
oh, I've got you. The proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place the authorization of holding a public hearing and to notice the property owners of record in accordance with Mississippi Code 21-19-11 at the board meeting of April 16, 2013, for the purpose of declaring the property a public nuisance and health hazard and providing the authority to enter the property located at the northeast corner of Highway 12 East and Vine Street, parcel 102A-00-272, to abate the existing hazard and nuisance. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision for the consent agenda?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda.
And then finally, we have, just to let Mr. Braden, Ms. Pierce, and Ms. Tew know that we have placed the item for the street closure on consent for the Heritage Museum. And so if they do want to present, they're more than happy to present, but if not, that item has been approved, and so your public appearance, you don't have to do that if you would not like, so.
Is there
Like to
anyone
just offer that.
here on behalf of that group? Do you still wish to make your public appearance?
I think we're okay.
Alderman Dumas, is the proposed
Well, then
revision
I
to
will,
remove that item?
let's remove item B under public appearance.
All right. Proposed revision, item C is in the same situation, Alderman Dumas.
Yeah, and man, you and Lynn want to speak, or,
All right.
okay.
The proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to remove items 7B and 7C from the agenda. Those items are as follows. A public appearance by Mac Braden, Chelsea Pierce, and Selena Tew of the American Institute of Architecture students requesting participation from the city of Starkville to close a public street, and a public appearance by Man Conrad and Lynn Birch on behalf of First United Methodist Church requesting participation from the city of Starkville for street closings and in-kind services for the Stop Hunger Now 5K run scheduled for Sunday, April 7th, 2013, from 3:30 to 5 p.m. from the agenda. Any objection to removing those items from the agenda? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, those items have been removed from the agenda. Alderman Perkins.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Just want to add one item to the agenda. I want to add a personnel matter for executive session, please, sir.
All right, proposed revision from Alderman Perkins is to add a personnel matter to the executive session portion of the agenda. Is there any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been added to the agenda.
And just to go back to the public appearances, I don't think the AIAS party is a public party, so y'all have your fun, but I do want to talk about the Stop Hunger Now race and give it a plug. It was a great event that our church does, the Methodist Church. It is April 7th from 3:30 to 5. It's a run. It's a big mission that we have as part of a bigger effort to raise funds, do other types of things. And so this is a great awareness thing that we do. So for more information, be sure to go to our church or Lynn, and we've got flyers here. So thank y'all for being here.
Are there any further proposed revisions to the agenda as written? Any further proposed revisions? Any further proposed revisions? Seeing none, a motion to approve the agenda as revised is in order.
So moved.
Motion has been made by Alderman Vaughn. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Corey. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. You now have before you the consent agenda. Is there any objection to the consent agenda as revised? Any objection to the consent agenda as revised? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, the consent agenda as revised has been approved. We have no minutes before us tonight, so that'll carry us into announcements and comments by the mayor and members of the board. And I'm actually going to pitch my first comment to General Manager of the Electric Department, Terry Kemp, and Rick Mizzo with TVA to explain an upcoming improvement we have to our electrical service and some consequence that improvement is going to have for us in the immediate future. Mr. Kemp?
Mayor and Board, had to have an opportunity to talk to you about a new project that TVA has been working on for several years that's really going to have a significant impact on our overall reliability and really preparation for the future. Before I ask Rick Misso, who is the customer service manager for this area and our primary contact, to kind of give you a little background on the history, of the project itself, I thought I'd kind of remind the board that this is a map that kind of shows the electric system as we currently operate. There is a loop that's comprised of 4 substations, and this is a point that's very important. This is a radial feed where we connect with TVA. The distance from this location to our closest transmission line is about 2.5 miles. So that creates a level of exposure. The project that Rick was talking about that TVA is going to do will bring a second transmission feed into this area, and it would enhance our reliability.
Can't hardly see that. Where is that exposed 2.5 miles out?
This location is our primary substation right at the corner of 182 and 12. By our operations center, that'd be our primary. And this transmission line is one that runs from that location to what we call the Starkville switching station, which is out on Rock Hill. Used to be Rock Hill subdivision, substation, but that's the area.
Okay.
And if you'll remember, at one time, I think the city of Starkville actually built that line. Part of the agreement was that when these improvements were made, there would be an opportunity for TVA to purchase that back, and that happened about a year or so ago. So TVA would be owning and operating that part. So, Mayor, if it's all right, the board will let Rick talk a little bit about the project and the bigger thing, and then come back and talk about how we make the final connections.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Board, for allowing some time this afternoon to bring this project to you. TVA started looking at this project probably back in 2007, and it was part of it was driven by the new load that's growing out toward the industrial park out at Golden Triangle, and we saw a need to tie our transmission lines together that exist between us and the Golden Triangle Park, and we felt like our study showed that would really stiffen our system, provide a much more reliable system. We worked with the management at Starkville Electric and at Fort County EPA, and we've made really good progress getting that line in place. It's 14 miles approximately. It includes a new switching station built on 16th Section Road. Some of you may have noticed that new construction. All in all, TVA's probably invested a little over $20 million in this project, and it's the last phase of it is to tie in the section between the substation on 16th Section Road, which we call Clayton Village Switching Station, to the Starkville tap line that Terry mentioned. And that will benefit both the whole Golden Triangle area, but for Starkville, it will actually bring a second feed nearly into your 161 kV bus, so we see that as very much a positive. And to,
I guess, and just kind of closing out, the plan, TVA, they're finishing up at Clayton Village. There's a lot of construction across 12, probably people have noticed that now, structures are in place. I think TVA's plan now is on, May the 19th, to have the first outage that will be required of the city, to facilitate construction of those switches. And then 4 weeks following that, a second outage, and that's scheduled for June the 26th, that would allow them to put it back normal, I guess, and then actually put the final switches in place. And at that point in time, we would have 2 feeds. But as I said earlier, we are on the radial, and since it's on the radial, when they have to take outages, there's really not much else we don't have any other supply, so that outages will do that. And TVA is working very closely with us with communications to make sure there's no surprises. But both of those are Sunday mornings, and
I believe that second date was the 23rd.
oh, excuse me.
If my calendar is
You're
right.
right. You're right.
I'm sorry.
I wrote it down. Said it many times. 23rd, May the 19th, June 23rd, Sunday mornings, start after midnight, and the schedule, I think Rick is planning to be up before the sun comes up, so it'll be, that's kind of the target.
I want to emphasize that part, because that's the part we're all going to notice immediately. Yeah, this does necessitate a series of outages, the longest being about 5 hours in duration. First will be May 19th, beginning at midnight until approximately 5 a.m. That's going to be the entire city, has to be out of power while this service is being connected.
That's correct.
That's right.
And when you
Alderman
said that,
Sister.
when you said the entire city, I'm sorry, there are some groups that, you're gonna be working closely with various people, but the hospital, the nursing homes,
That's right.
you're gonna make every effort to make sure that,
That's right, and we've partnered real closely with Fort County at Clayton Village to offer backup supply, and we're working with them to study our load to see if there might be some ways that we can pick up parts of the city. But, in reality, we're talking about a break, and of course with the university, but that's what we'll be spending a lot of our time now over the next 6 weeks or so, getting ready to communicating and making those final plans, right?
All right, and our board members have spent the day learning more intensively about this project as TVA has been on site all day. But some of you may have some additional questions or comments after the experience. Alderman Carver?
Interested, the line between, I guess it's a TVA, the substation that you're calling the Clayton Village, the new one, and then the last line into the city, has that line already been established, or is it?
Yes, sir. It's built. It's, if you go just on the Highway 12 bypass, you'll see it just beyond where the Research Park overpass is.
Okay.
And it runs parallel with the railroad across. Is that
Right. Goes,
That's the last.
goes on the edge of the North Farm, the Mississippi State's North Farm.
Okay.
Alderman Vaughn?
The second outage is gonna last 5 hours too.
And second will be shorter, will it not?
Well, we're hoping both would be, but right now we're planning for about 5 hours on each. And let me say too, from our standpoint, the city, we're taking those opportunities while TVA is working to do some work as well around town and in substations that would normally be out. But right now, we're planning for 2 5-hour outages. Right? I mean,
That's right.
That's y'all's
Yeah,
schedule.
that's our estimate. We do everything we can to make it shorter, but that's what our workers are predicting. Right.
And the net effect of this is a very positive outcome for the city. This is approximately a $20 million investment by the Tennessee Valley Authority into our electrical system. And it is to ensure that we have more sources of power that makes power outage events less likely in the future.
Exactly.
Further questions or comments by the members of the board? Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I have one final comment tonight, and that is the introduction of our newest city employee, Mr. Bill Snowden, the director of our newly formed Community Development Department. Mr. Snowden is making history as the first director of community development in the city of Starkville. And it is my pleasure to introduce Bill Snowden as our new director of community development. He is a native of Everdeen, Alabama. He received a Bachelor of Arts as well as a Master of Arts in Political Science and Public Administration from Jacksonville State University. Bill also received his Master of City Planning from the Georgia Institute of Technology. He previously operated his own consulting firm, Snowden and Associates, specializing in comprehensive planning, specific and area plans, land use law, and expert testimony. Bill worked for 10 years as the Director of Planning and Economic Development for the city of Tuscaloosa before retiring in September 2012. He has also worked for the cities of Birmingham, Alabama, Auburn, Alabama, Albany, Georgia, and Rock Hill, South Carolina. In addition to his many years of experience as a city planner, Bill has experience with federal programs, planning and land use controls, and economic development. Bill and his wife Kirby have 2 sons, John and Billy. They also have a yellow Labrador named Roxy. Bill enjoys his work as well as anything that pertains to history. In his spare time, Bill enjoys watching the game show Jeopardy! Please join me in welcoming Bill Snowden.
Good, Alex, we're back in person. Oh, okay. Thanks for so many people showing up for me tonight. I'm really humbled to get this offer, and I've been told to be quiet, and I will be. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. That concludes my comments this evening. Do we have any comments from the members of the board? Have any comments from the members of the board? Seeing none, we'll move to citizen comments. At this time, any citizen wishing to make comments may do so by coming forward, introducing yourself, and you'll be recognized to speak for a maximum of 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Board. My name is Alvin Thomas, Ward 7. Like to recognize Vice Mayor Sid Trump and Alderman Vaughn.
Mr. Turner.
To the electric department, though Alden, it'll be good to put those dates in our electric bill so that we will understand what's going on. Some concerns of the citizens. Jefferson Street in very need of sidewalk. That is connected from the jailhouse to the probation office, back to the jailhouse. And courts coming up, and it'll make it very easy if the lawyers and the probation office and everyone be safe, then to let someone get away. But it's very much needed from the probation office to the and back for safety reasons. The citizens, we have some disappointments that we hope that take under consideration, and that is we were disappointed about the situation with the city clerk, but we accepted. Carver Drive, alcohol on Sunday, ET lot, those were some disappointments, but we was able to accept. But let us be better when you're dealing with taxpayers and their money.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Further citizen comments?
Milo Burnham from Ward 2, Mr. Mayor, Board. 2 items. One, I'd like to know why yard trash that is scheduled to be picked up on Monday, and I get it out there by 7 o'clock in the morning. It's not picked up until like 2:30 to 3 o'clock this afternoon. That's the first item, and this is not the first time that's happened. Second item has to do with, I know there is a public hearing tonight on the landscape ordinance, and I'm glad to meet Mr. Snowden. I am prepared to make some statements at the public hearing, but before that, I'd like to say that I hope that the board will take no action on the adoption of that landscape ordinance until Mr. Snowden has had an opportunity to go through it with a fine-tooth comb and have his input, because I certainly think it's needed.
Thank you, Mr. Burnham.
And Milo, we're not taking action. We're gonna have a third public hearing. So, and for that very reason, so Mr. Snowden will have time.
I guess I was gonna ask you, what time, you said you put your trash out at 7, does the truck ever come through there before 7, or what time is the normal pickup?
The truck didn't come through. It was interesting that I had 3 containers out there, one of which was filled with broken styrofoam, and that was picked up with my garbage sometime Monday afternoon. The 3 garbage cans filled with yard trash, dead plants and such, were not picked up until 2:30 to 3 o'clock this afternoon. They were all out there at the same time, 7 o'clock yesterday morning.
Thank you.
Do we have any further citizen comments? Any further citizen comments this evening? Any further citizen comments? Seeing none, we'll move to public appearances, and we now have only one public appearance, as 2 were stricken, and that is by Chairman Moreland from the Parks Commission and Mr. Peters, Parks Director. And gentlemen, you'll have 10 minutes, and I ask that you remain for questions and comments from the members of the board.
We have very little to report on today. We're kind of at a dead time. We just finished SAY basketball, which was very successful. But we do have, one other thing I'd like to mention that has nothing to do with the parks, but it helps feed the parks, is the horse show that they had at the horse park this weekend. Had 3,026 entries over 2.5 days. That put a lot of 2% money into the Starkville, Mississippi. And I don't know where y'all know it or not, but with Brickley Miller is doing a great job out there. She does a fine job. Had she not been hired, we would have been looking at an Oklahoma place up here where they're trying their best to get theirs back open. That girl is doing a good job, and y'all need to tell her that when you can. We've got 2 new employees that we hired, both of our coordinators, sports coordinators. If y'all will come forward. They might not much to look at, but they do a good job. Herman has one of them here, let me tell you, it's no need of trying to pronounce his name because he can't pronounce it twice the same way. His name is Pokup, but it's spelled P-O-C-H-O-P, so if y'all want to take a shot at it, go ahead. William is, and Chauncey Brown and William Pokup, and I'm gonna let Herman read his story on that.
Chauncey is a native of Columbia, Mississippi. He attended East Mississippi Community College, the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, and the University of West Alabama. Before joining Starkville Parks, he worked at Wardolph College, Columbus High School, and Clarksdale High School as instructor and assistant football coach. Chauncey is a certified personal trainer, boot camp instructor, and CPR certified. He is a past member of the Minnesota Vikings and the Centrex Barracudas of the Professional Football League. When Chauncey is not busy working, he enjoys working out, watching movies, and reading. Please join me in welcoming Chauncey Brown as sports coordinator to Starkville Park and Recreation. William Pokup is a native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Florence, Alabama. He attended Mississippi State University and received a Bachelor of Science from the College of Education and Sports Communication in May of 2012. During his time as a student at Mississippi State, William spent 5 months as intern with Starkville Park and Recreation, working closely with the full-time staff in organizing community events and recreational sports seasons. Before joining staff at Starkville Park, William worked in tournament administration and golf management for Mississippi Golf Association, where he helped organize and oversee the success of over 50 tournaments throughout the state for the 2012 MGA season. When he's not working, William enjoys playing several different sports as well as singing, playing different musical instruments. Please join me in welcoming William Poker as sports coordinator to Starkville Park and Recreation.
I told y'all we didn't have much to say, but we're gonna hold them down to 30 minutes each on their speech tonight. So much overtime, ring the bell.
Well, we've already been dismissed, I guess that's my speech. Thanks for.
Y'all have any questions of Herman or myself?
Any questions or comments for Mr. Peters or Chairman Moreland? Any questions or comments? Any questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
The next matter before you is the second public hearing on amending the official municipal street map and street index in accordance with Mississippi Code 65-7-143. This is the housekeeping matter to officially adopt all streets in the city of Starkville by ordinance. Questions or comments from the members of the board?
I've got one. Under the Ds for Dr. Douglas L. Connor Drive, that should read, we should add the word formerly North Washington Street.
I think that's been done.
Oh, it has?
It's in the index, I handed that to Alderman Perkins, I didn't
Okay. Okay,
So the correction was made in the written packet that the board has before them?
good.
Right.
Well, no, it didn't, but it is now, I mean, we put it on the map now. I
So it's
didn't
on the
realize
map.
it was something that wanted to be done, but we put it on the map.
Does the board have before them a copy of the writing that is the map, so it needs to be done through amendment when they discuss the ordinance?
We'd like to make sure that that is stated, yes.
Okay. Yeah, that would be the safest thing to do to make sure that it carries forward in writing. But that can wait until we're actually discussing.
I mean, do we even need North Washington Street in parentheses? Why not strike that altogether and just have it done? Just strike it.
If it's Dale Connor, it's Dale
If
Connor.
it's Dale Connor, just strike it.
Yeah, Mayor, just for information, the board adopted that back sometime in the year of 2000. It's in the minutes, Ms. School has seen it, so just strike it in its entirety, North Washington Street.
And we'll reflect that in the action.
Okay. And remember, we're not actually discussing the matter right now, so make sure we get that in the record when the matter comes up for consideration. All right, Alderman Carver?
What's gonna be the process after this official amendment now? What would be the process, say, in a year if somebody wants to change the street name?
Same process. You have a policy that requires 80% of the residents or property owners adjacent approving, but now it has to be officially adopted by ordinance.
So we're gonna have to do that each and every time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Further questions or comments from the members of the board? Any further questions or comments from the members of the board? Seeing none, we will move into the public comment portion of the public hearing. And we will conduct this as is standard practice for our public hearings on ordinances and ordinance amendments. We will hear in alternating fashion from speakers for the ordinance and speakers against the ordinance. Each speaker will be given a maximum of 3 minutes to make their presentation. Each side will be given a collective total of 15 minutes. We will go through that process until either each side has exhausted its 15 minutes or until no one else wishes to speak. At this time, is there anyone in favor of the proposed ordinance that wishes to speak? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Seeing no one, is there anyone that wishes to speak against the proposed ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak against the proposed ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak for, against, or indifferent to the proposed ordinance?
Good evening to everyone. My name is Alvin Turner. I have grand mal seizures. It scares people. And if they call the ambulance, they might get, if you get to change the streets and stuff, it might get them confused. Where do Martin Luther King start and stop? Where do Douglas Connor start and stop?
All right, and there was a question. Could somebody address that on the map? where the designation of 182 as Martin Luther King Jr. Drive and the designation of what was formerly Washington Street has been changed to Douglas L. Connor Street, or on the map.
I can address one of them, Mr. Mayor. Dr. Douglas L. Connor Drive is from Main Street to Curry Street, and I'm not sure about Martin Luther King, where it starts and stops. I'd have to look at it. If you'd like me to go do that, we have to do that.
It's the entire length of 182 within the city limits. So, any further comments on the subject? Any further comments of any nature on the ordinance? Any further comments? All right, seeing none, we'll move back into board comments on the subject. Do we have any board comments? Alderman Carver.
What this is preluding to, this will go, as Needmore met the 80% requirements on the.
Yeah, but
Okay.
you will recall that Needmore Street was pulled out of this ordinance. The board has previously taken action
Okay.
to ceremonially dedicate it, but it has taken no further action at this time with renaming the street.
Okay. So I guess will it be adopted if we vote on this?
It is not a part of this ordinance.
Well, we come back, I mean, that's ceremonially, so we have to come back and.
It is at your pleasure to come back and revisit that.
Okay.
Any further questions or comments from the members of the board? Any further questions or comments from the members of the board? Any further questions or comments? All right, seeing none, that will conclude the second public hearing on adopting a street ordinance. You now have before you the third public hearing on adopting an ordinance to regulate use, location, and visibility of outside storage. Alderman Dumas, would you like to introduce?
I would. Just to quickly go over some of this being the third public hearing, we had some questions I know that Mr. Taylor had asked about this ordinance before, and so some of the changes that have been made to this are minor, but they do answer the question about screening. There was a question about screening in a porch, and so what we've done is added some definitions. Screening is defined as an opaque, permanent, rigid structure at minimum height of 6 feet. And so as you can see in the ordinance as it's stated, the examples that I showed on 182 with the mattresses being outside in a porch, a temporary screen that was non-rigid and non-permanent or as such in the definition would not work. So basically you can't roll down a screen or put a curtain over it or those types of things. You would have to have a permanent screen if you want to include or display your interior furnishings, couches, mattresses, clothes, those types of things outside in a permanent manner. So that by and large is the largest, is the biggest change. There's some other clerical changes and definitions of rear yard, front yard, side yard were mentioned in the ordinance. We moved those out of the language of the ordinance in section, I think that was in section 5 or 4. We put those in the definition just to clean it up so that it went through the whole reference throughout the whole ordinance. Industrial district was the same thing. It was referenced in outside storage that those areas in the industrial park are excluded from this ordinance. So for example, the co-op or by the yard or those types of things are allowed to display bulk items that they do have and need outside in bulk areas. So that was stated in there. The only change was we took the industrial area out and clearly defined it in the definitions, other than it just being a part of the language in the ordinance itself. So those by and large are the largest changes, specifically the screening of defining it more discreetly per the questions that were asked at the last public hearing.
Do we have any questions or comments from the members of the board for Alderman Dumas? Any questions or comments? Any questions or comments from the members of the board?
Now, I guess my question, retractable screen, it doesn't matter if it's transparent, it doesn't matter. It's just, it cannot, its intent cannot be to hide the indoor furniture placed outside.
Right.
So, any kind of screen.
Yeah, you know, a garage door that is not transparent, you know, you can put that down, or some type of rigid structure that is at least 6 feet tall. It's of permanence and rigid, so you could slide something over it, for example. The biggest issue is we don't want to a shower curtain to be used, or some, beads, or, we could use all kind of examples. Oh, come on, Richard, you know what beads I'm talking about. So there's examples there that we didn't want to, because those were great questions asked by Mr. Taylor. I'm glad he raised those. Because in those types of areas, some of them do have porches, so they have covers, so they have the structure there needed to where they could just, in fact, put a curtain over it and slide it around, and as it was written, without a true definition of screen, that would have been allowed, obviously, and we didn't want that to be the case.
Further questions or comments from from the members of the board for Alderman Dipples? Any further questions or comments from the members of the board? Seeing none, we'll move to the public comment portion of the public hearing. At this time, we will conduct this in the same manner as outlined previously. At this time, anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance, please come forward. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Is there anyone wishing to speak against the proposed ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak for, against, or indifferent to the proposed ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak? Anyone wishing to speak on the proposed ordinance? Seeing no one, we'll hear final comments from the members of the board. Do we have any final comments from the members of the board? Any final comments? Seeing none, we'll now move to the second public hearing on amending the landscape ordinance in the City of Starkville Code of Ordinances, Chapter 112, Article 2. Alderman Dumas, would you like to introduce?
Yes. I want to thank Mr. Templeton. Brian, I know you're here. Brian's here, and Bob Bruzak is here, and then Steve Grado's here, I believe. So we do have 3 members of the tree committee that were here last time. We had a very detailed presentation by Brian that talked about the compare and contrast of what the current ordinance does to the as proposed to the proposed ordinance. And since that time, I think there's been some good comments made. I know Milo had some comments. Mr. Stoughton has not, in fact, had a chance to read this, to my knowledge. We want to give him the chance to do that. The main reason behind that is that this whole process was started by Ben Griffith, and he did it asking us to help make a process that was not cumbersome, and that's been a question that's been posed to me, or a comment that's been posed to me by somebody that has looked at it. And so by no means do we want this process or this ordinance to be cumbersome. We want it to, in fact, be very detailed to the point that it helps Mr. Snowden or anyone within the community development program or office to help an applicant through the process, so that it's very clear what's expected. It's very clear how those are those plant materials, whatever they may be, can be thought of and put into the process from the very beginning. So under no circumstance do we want that to be cumbersome on anyone, specifically Mr. Snowden, because his organization will be the one responsible for that. So we do want to give him ample time for that. So I welcome to hear Milo's comments so that Mr. Burnham or Mr. Snowden can understand those, as well as those tree board members who are here, so that we can take those under consideration for the next 2 weeks, because we will have another public hearing on this and adoption, or consideration of adoption at the next board meeting.
Any questions or comments from the members of the board? Alderman Carver.
I've got a couple of things, just, I guess we're addressing it, letting Mr. Snowden have an opportunity to look at this, and if you don't feel like you've had enough time, maybe just give him an extra week or 2, because it appears that either he or a member of his department is gonna be the one doing the enforcement of this, and pre-legwork before people start their development. Second was, I know this is just an open-ended question, but again, back to the removal of dead vegetation and things like that, do you think there's any way to incorporate some kind of maintenance aspect more than, or is this not the proper avenue to do that, as far as, I mean, not just, this is a good ordinance, but I mean, something to do to address the recurring maintenance of this property after you set in place what plants and point systems and things like that. And then my third was again, I asked you last time, but normally the perennials, they don't count into that point system, that a plant that's gonna be there every year, and the small vegetation less than a shrub, I think it was 3 feet in height. I guess that's for you, yeah.
You can field it.
Okay. Yeah, the point system we set up, we did not put perennials in there.
it's certainly amendable so that you could.
Yeah.
But the system that we set up didn't do that. We weren't familiar with other systems where that had been put in place by municipalities.
They normally don't count them in.
None that I'm familiar with do. But again, technically, a tree is a perennial. You know, almost all of the plants that we think of are technically perennials except for annuals. And so using that term is kind of ambiguous if you're just using the term perennial. So yeah, I understand you're looking at more of herbaceous perennials and you know, smaller plants. And those don't give back benefit to the community to the scale that shrubs and trees do, which is really where we were coming at this from, was what's gonna benefit the community, not just the site where we're asking it to happen. And so that was kind of the basis, and I think that's why we didn't go that far, if you will.
Okay.
Does that address that particular part?
It does. And then I guess back to my
And
question, do you think this is the right way to address
And
the
to speak to
maintenance?
the maintenance side, the real intent of this was to be a development-oriented ordinance so that it would guide and help development from the very beginning of a development process. I do feel your pain, as I said, about the maintenance stuff, and I think that's more of a code enforcement issue. Now, there is some maintenance stuff in here when it talks about the warranties of plants, those types of things that Brian talked about with, do we give them a year, I believe?
It depends on I think it depends on which situation it is and what type of
Right,
plant
so-
it is and what the purpose of the plant was.
So within the development process, if a plant dies because of the development phase, they will have to replace it on that maintenance side. But as far as perpetual maintenance of yard, grass, those types of things, this isn't really that avenue. I think
Okay.
that needs to be something much more on the code enforcement side.
Okay.
Alderman Sister.
Would you just give a quick response to a question about to whom will this apply? It doesn't apply to, existing houses, for instance.
That's correct.
So,
We've actually got the presentation loaded. Brian, do you want to speak to that? Is there any part of that you want to discuss per the presentation?
or just an answer, if you, one more time.
I mean, I can pull out the actual verbiage if you'd like me to, but basically it's any development or redevelopment that happens within the jurisdiction of the city of Starkville that is not single-family residence. It would include single-family residences that are developed or redeveloped as part of a larger subdivision.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find the exact wordage, or verbiage, wordage is a word? Wordage is a word. All land located in the city zoned R4, R5, B1, C1, C2, M1 PUDs.
That's the old one.
That's the existing.
Existing, I'm sorry, yes. This article shall be applicable within the city of Starkville jurisdictional area and shall apply to all new development or redevelopment. Exemptions include individual single-family residential lots, provided however that single-family lots that are not part of a new subdivision or phased development project are not exempt from this article. So it's just like the sidewalk ordinance.
Right.
If you're part of a greater subdivision of land, you have to abide by it, holistically, not on the individual parcel basis. And that, I think, by and large, is the biggest issue there, that it tracks very closely to similar languages that we
And
have.
I think sometimes we get confused when we read this in the paper, or we see it on TV, or listen to us talk about it. We think it applies to every one, and we're talking about new developments and redevelopment.
Correct.
Instead of single-family houses, so.
And again, the intent is your larger, your commercial properties, which currently are in there, and then your larger subdivisions of land, regardless of land use.
I believe Mr. Templeton had a comment.
I'd just like to point out as well that all of the specifications and requirements in the ordinance only apply to plant material that's required by the ordinance. So if someone goes above and beyond, they don't have to abide by the ordinance for the extra stuff that they did. So if you had to plant 3 trees and you plant 5, it only applies to the 3 trees that fall within the area of requirement. Does that make sense?
It does.
Further questions or comments from the members of the board? Do we have any further questions or comments from the members of the board? Seeing none, we'll now move into the public comment portion of the public hearing. And This will be conducted in the same format as the two previous public hearings. At this time, anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor? Is there anyone wishing to speak against the proposed ordinance? Mr. Burnham.
I'm Milo Burnham from Ward 2. I made a couple of comments about the ordinance 2 weeks ago at the initial public hearing. And since then, I've had an opportunity to read it. And, well, I had an opportunity then, and I questioned Ms. Spruill about an item, and she got me an answer from Mr. Templeton. As you've already discussed, the central business district used to be included in the, or is included in the old ordinance, but would not be included in the new ordinance, which may be a good thing because it's made me wonder if the present planting downtown would have qualified under the regulations proposed in the new ordinance. I guess we'll find out when those trees start dying and they have to be replaced as to what goes in there. But the document as proposed is very detailed in nature as far as the number of plants, the size of the plants, and it even goes so far as to suggest an arrangement for some of the plants. And I realize these are just a suggestion. It's very explicit in that regard. But it's not explicit in regard to what is to be planted as far as the nature and the identification of the trees, what is permissible and what is not permissible. In reading the ordinance on section 4, it states here under canopy trees, quote, a listing of preferred canopy trees can be found in the landscape appendix. Similar wording is there for small trees on item B8 as well as for invasive plants items under K3. When you go to the appendix, this is what I found. 3 items with supposedly recommendations. One of these being Mississippi Trees, which is a hobbyist's manual prepared for people who would like to walk around and look at trees and maybe be able to identify them. The second one is a document called the Mississippi Urban and Community Forestry Management Manual. A lot of words, as far as I'm concerned, not a great deal of useful information because of the fact that it states in there that as far as trees are concerned, that what they're identifying are trees that are suitable for planting in Tennessee. And the list include a number of trash trees which we don't want, trees which are dangerous, but they are approved in that list. The reference goes on with suitable community forest trees, tulip tree, trash tree, slash pine, may not grow, loblolly pine, who wants that? Longleaf pine may not grow. Common persimmon is in these lists as far as acceptable canopy trees. Who wants common persimmons in parking lots? Who wants common persimmons? The third reference, a management guide for invasive plants in southern forests, is exactly that. What you don't want to plant in southern forests. We're not planting southern forests. Folks, the list and suggestions are not there. The references are poor. They need to be replaced. And if they can't be replaced with a decent set of references that would give somebody an idea of what's going to be acceptable, then take out the reference to list of acceptable species of plants. And I suggest that at this time, the ordinance is not acceptable. It's not acceptable to me. It needs to go back to the drawing board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burnham. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak against the proposed ordinance?
Chris Taylor, Ward 7. I want to know, have y'all contacted any of the garden clubs and got any recommendation from them?
Alderman Dumas, would you like to speak to that?
Steve, you want to talk to that?
Yeah, what I could say is I've already spoken formally to 2 garden clubs, and I'm scheduled to speak to the 3rd one on April 4th, I think. And they're all overwhelmingly in favor of the ordinance. And I'm not going to spend time addressing what Milo just said. I'll just wait till Mr. Snowden talks about that. But they're overwhelmingly in favor of it. But one of their orientations is to make Starkville a Tree City USA. And while you need an ordinance, you can go with that old ordinance, it might not work. So that ordinance is one of the 4 standards that's required, but they're all overwhelmingly in favor of it.
And to speak to that, we actually have had someone who, I forget which garden club it was, that actually approached the tree committee to ask that we take this and take the lead on the Tree City USA application for them as part of this whole process. So yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Is anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak against the proposed ordinance?
My name is Alvin Turner, Ward 7. There's a lot of trees are in the house and complex. We get very frightened when we have a storm. We don't know how old those trees are. They are around a lot of electric lines, and we would just like to know how old a tree can be before it falls. Hope it don't fall. And if the limbs get too far out into the electric line, who is to take care of that?
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Well, Mr. Turner brings up a good point. I do want to say that one of the more interesting days of my sitting on this board has been dealing with some of the tree issues at Pecan Acres. Yeah, Mr. Weatherly will agree with that. And I think this ordinance does one of the positives of the committee is that we've had an arborist that is part of 4-county Electrical Power Association, and what he's been able to do is help us to look at issues associated with trees and how they are with electrical lines, utilities, those types of things. Because I think Mr. Kemp will attest to the fact that we have ample situations around town where trees are planted in the wrong location, and we spend a lot of money in pruning trees in locations that they should not be because of utility lines. And so this ordinance does address the location of those and where they should be.
Anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? Mr. Burnham?
Nay, it's a good beginning.
Thank you, Mr. Burnham.
High praise.
Anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed ordinance?
That statement can't go understated. That
That's
really
what I
can't.
said, high praise.
High praise.
I told y'all at the last meeting he would give it a thorough reading.
And he did.
Anyone now wishing to speak for, against, or indifferent to the proposed ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak? Anyone wishing to speak? Seeing no one, we'll go back into final comments from the members of the board. Any concluding comments from the members of the board? Any
I'd just like to say that whenever we're going through this sort of process, it's always very helpful to have comments. It's great to have people who help us in drafting language. It's great to have the public input, and I hope that as we move forward with this, and I'm trying to find Mr. Snowden back there, that you take note of these comments as you're reading and studying the ordinance, and we certainly take note of your comments as well.
Any further concluding comments from the members of the board? Any further concluding comments? Any further comments? Seeing none, that will conclude the second public hearing on the landscape ordinance. We'll now move to board business. First matter you have before you is the consideration of amending the official municipal street map and street index.
With North Washington Street stricken.
All right, motion by Alderman Dumas is to approve the amending of the official municipal street map and street index in accordance with Mississippi Code 65-7-143 and amending the City of Starkville Code of Ordinances, Chapter 98, to add Article 5, an index and map of city streets, with the following amendment, striking the reference to formerly known as Washington Street that accompanies Douglas L. Connor Drive. Alderman Dumas, is that your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Corey. Alderman Dumas, do you wish to speak on the merits?
No.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. You now have before you the motion has been made by Alderman Dumas to approve the adoption of an ordinance to regulate use, location, and visibility of outside storage, and to amend the Code of Ordinances, Chapter 54, Environment, Article 3, Nuisances, to add Division 3, Outside Storages, outside storage, section 54-80 et sec, as presented. Alderman Dumas, is that your motion?
Yes.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Vaughn. Alderman Dumas, do you wish to speak on the merits?
I do not.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
By a vote of 6 in favor with 1 against, this measure passes. The next matter on the agenda is the consideration of calling for a public hearing on an ordinance to amend all existing ordinances containing quasi-judicial entities. Discussion.
Move approval.
Motion has been made by Alderman Dumas to approve of the calling for a public hearing on an ordinance to amend all existing ordinances containing quasi-judicial entities with binding authority to ordinances with advisory authority only reporting to the Board of Aldermen as presented. Alderman Dumas, is that your motion?
Yes.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Sistrunk. Alderman Dumas, do you wish to speak on the merits?
I do not.
Any discussion? Alderman Parker.
I just have a question. There was some discussion in the beginning about BOA and our Stormwater Hearing Board not being part of this. Are they part of this now, where they're just advisory and they're not? My question is, are they included in this?
Yes.
Everybody is included.
They will be.
So they would only be advisory.
Correct.
So everything that went to BOA would have to come to us as well.
Right now, everything that goes before those bodies, and city attorney, correct me if I'm wrong, is appealable.
That's
But
right.
it does not, out of necessity, go to the Board of Aldermen. This would change that to make it just like the P and Z reporting structure.
Okay. I mean, do we want to see it? We have a public hearing.
And we do have a public hearing, but I will say that the Stormwater Hearing Board has not met, and Mr. Burnham can probably tell us how often the Board of Adjustments and Appeals meets, but I take it it's a handful of times each year. So could grow. There's no way to predict the future, but currently it wouldn't be tremendously cumbersome to add them
Further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. The next matter on the agenda is a report from the Electric Department General Manager on the new billing process. Mr. Kemp.
Mayor Board, this is, I guess this goes back to an item that was on the agenda back about a month ago. It is a service that is currently, or has been offered by SEDC, which is our billing group, which we've had in place for about 7 years. The intent of this change was to move the bills that were actually mailed. So it only accumulates, a small portion of the bills would be going back directly back into SEDC's agent. They would actually take that, put it in their account, and then deposit the dollars. So it's an effort to be more efficient in our operation on an item that basically when a customer puts their payment in the mail, it actually, instead of going to our post office box, it goes to a post office box that's identified by SEDC. All of those transactions are handled daily. The money is transferred into our account, and the customer should see no change at all. We did do a test about a month or two ago in discussing whether or not we wanted to go forward with this, to look at cycle time to see if it would have any impact on reaching destinations at the right time, and we found no situation where that it exceeded or caused any penalties or anything outside the norm. But here again, I'd stress too that this is only for the ones that actually take the stub with the check and mail it. All the others would be handled in our office. And the Birmingham location is one that was identified by SCDC. who is our billing. So that's where that process would work, so.
People could still pay in person, they could still have auto drafts.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's much like almost every bill I get these days. I will drop, if I write a check and drop it in the mail, it will go to this lockbox and it will just process through my bank account as if I had mailed it directly to
That's correct.
your address.
And really, it's a lot more efficient because it's a lot less hands. The way we do it, we have to go to the post office to take that out, bring it in, and then process it, and then put it into the system, and then verify it. To me, this will make it a lot easier, but you're right. We still handle probably about 24,000 interactions in a month right now. We still see a majority of that is coming face-to-face, but all the other services would be like the same. This only addresses those that are actually mailed.
Any further questions or comments from the members of the board? Any further questions or comments from the members of the board? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Kemp. We will move to the request for approval to issue a notice to proceed to Hemp Hill Construction.
No, claim stock. What claim stock you got?
Oh, excuse me. Request for approval of the City of Starkville claims docket for all departments except for the fire
Move
department.
approval.
Motion has been made by Alderman Corey to approve of the City of Starkville claims docket for all departments except for the fire department as of March 14th, 2013, as presented. Alderman Corey, is that your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Sistrunk. Alderman Corey, do you wish to speak on the merits?
I do not.
Any discussion, any discussion, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
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 By a vote of 5 in favor with 2 against, this measure passes. The next matter on your agenda is the notice to proceed for Hemp Hill Construction.
Mayor, I wish to recuse myself.
We'll give Alderman Corey a moment to exit the room. Discussion.
Move approval.
Motion has been made by Alderman Davis to approve of the issuance of a notice to proceed to Hemp Hill Construction, the submitter of the lowest bid for the Montgomery Street filter plant, filter and media replacement project in the amount of $219,551 as presented. Alderman Davis, that's your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Vaughn. Alderman Davis, you wish to speak on the merits?
I do not.
Any discussion, any discussion, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. And that concludes the open session portion of our agenda. We do have matters for potential executive session. A motion to go into closed session to determine whether there is a need for an executive session is in order.
So moved.
Motion has been made by Alderman Vaughn to go into closed session to determine whether there is a need for an executive session. Alderman Vaughn, is that your motion?
Yes, that's motion.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Sistrunk. Alderman Vaughn, do you wish to speak on the merits?
No, sir.
Any discussion, any discussion, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. At this time, as the board moves in closed session, I would ask that we clear the room. And without objection, board, I'm gonna move us into a brief recess. Is there any objection, any objection, any objection? Seeing none, stand in brief recess.